Good day, friends of Wildland Fire. This is Darren Clavel, the South Dakota State Fire Meteorologist. Today is May 2, Friday, 2025. Of course, this is our South Dakota Fire Potential Outlook. So we're going to look at some climatology, look at peak fire seasons within South Dakota. We'll look at some forecast conditions and then go over the overall wildfire potential for the state. Of course, when I talk about potential, I'm only talking about environmental potential here. And of course, we have to talk about ignition potential as well, which involves lightning or humans. So again, this is just environmental potential. I'm not going to be discussing overall ignition potential, which would lead us to a wildfire risk metric. Kind of a busy graph here, but if you're familiar with these presentations, you'll know that I show them often. Each of the diagrams represents kind of a section of South Dakota. So the upper left would represent northwestern South Dakota, the lower right would be southeastern South Dakota, the left center one is Black Hills. So kind of just think of this as a map of South Dakota. In each graph, you see January through December on the bottom. So it's representing time of year, and then the lines represent the total number of fires read by the right-hand side of the graph for each month. And the bars talk about how much area was burned, which is read off the left-hand side of the graph. Key thing I want to point out is that for western and central South Dakota, really peak fire season is summertime, July through early fall. If we look at eastern South Dakota, we're already coming out of their peak fire season, which is kind of mid-spring. And they do get fires out there when the fuels are completely cured. There's no snow, windy day, etc. But yeah, so really the focus of this presentation is going to be on western and central South Dakota as we progress into the summer months. So for western South Dakota, our overall climatic drivers of big fire years are for June and July's drought. And then we also need coincident above average temperatures during those months, and then short and long-term precipitation deficits. So as we're sitting down, I'll get to more of this in a bit, but we're, drought conditions across most of South Dakota right now. Those would be considered, also long-term precipitation deficits. So we're already sort of tilting the scales towards a busier fire season just by looking at the precip deficits that we've been racking up over the past year. When we get the later summer, August into September, it's really hot and dry, short-term hot and dry conditions, because the fuels are already kind of on their way out in terms of dying off for the season. At least the annual herbaceous material is. Looking back over the past year, this is the percent of normal precipitation. Warm colors are below average precipitation, cool colors above average precipitation. And by and large, the western United States has been drier than average. That's really been focused around the desert southwest. And then if you look at South Dakota and northwestern Nebraska, we're really sitting anywhere between maybe 45 to 75% of average precipitation. So kind of predisposing the fuels to already be dry. And we had exceptionally dry fuels across western South Dakota throughout the winter. Over the past 90 days, we have percent of normal precipitation on the left, and then we put that in terms of numbers, departure from normal precipitation on the right, because, really February is kind of a dry month for us. So although we might see 40% of average during February, it really doesn't account for much. But now that we're getting into April and May, the overall amount of precipitation is increasing because for much of the Black Hills, May is the wettest month of the year. So anyways, this is over the past 90 days. Northeastern Hills, northern Black Hills seen average-ish precipitation. Southern Black Hills, southwestern South Dakota, below average precipitation. And then kind of a smattering of average, above average and below average precip across the state. It's really been dependent upon the overall convective precipitation or the thunderstorms that we've gotten in the past 2 weeks. Coming into this, the last 2 week period, it was relatively really dry, but we have gotten some decent moisture in areas that have gotten those thunderstorms. Over the past 90 days, it's been cooler than average across the Black Hills and kind of the western third of the state, with near average conditions over central South Dakota and average to warmer than average over eastern South Dakota. Here's our United States Drought Monitor. The big map is for this year. That was released yesterday. And of course, we have abnormally dry DNOT conditions or worse across all of South Dakota. The biggest drought signals we're really seeing are across the southern Black Hills, southwestern South Dakota, going into the Panhandle, Nebraska, and east central to southeastern Wyoming. That's been kind of the dry pocket throughout the winter and even now into early spring. We did see a little bit of improvement in the drought monitor this week over last week, namely across eastern South Dakota and northwestern South Dakota. But if we compare to where we are now to where we were last year about this time, there was very little drought or even abnormally dry conditions across the state. And so this has been kind of a burgeoning drought. It's one that's been unfolding over the past year. And we can look at our 52-week change in the U.S. Drought Monitor class to really kind of highlight the areas that have been seeing drought progression over the past 52 weeks. The other notable thing, I think, is the desert Southwest, man. They had a dry they've had a dry past year. So what's our outlook for kind of late spring going into early fall? Well, let's look at May, June, and July. That's MJJ, May, June, and July. These are temperature forecasts. The bottom 8 tiles are all kind of different models that are used to forecast out temperatures May, June, and July. The top left is the National Multi-Model Ensemble, and then the prob forecast is just kind of what's the probability that forecast will actually pan out. So red, you're seeing red everywhere. That's basically telling you above average temperatures in every model, namely for pretty much all of the entire continental United States. Well, frankly, and Alaska and many of them too. But the probability of that occurring is strongest over the Great Basin going into the western Great Plains, and that encompasses our area. They're giving our area above an 80% chance of us being warmer than average during that period. So we are kind of looking down the barrel of a warm summer. And again, I do want to stress that this is against a 30-year record that would run from 1990 to 2020. I'll talk more about that in a second. But yeah, so above average temperatures are expected by and large in bulk during this period. Looking at our precipitation forecast, the warm colors now are below average precipitation during the same period, May, June, and July. And the greens and blues are above average precipitation. And the signal's pretty strong for below average precipitation, again, across the northern Great Plains and even the northern Rockies going into the Pacific Northwest. And, pretty good odds of that, 60-ish% chance of us seeing that below average precipitation during this period. And again, May and June are really our 2 wettest months. July is not far behind in terms of overall wetness. And so if we're not picking up the moisture during the summertime when our convective season, our thunderstorm season, when we need to be picking up the moisture, we're going to continue to fall behind, and we're going to continue to see drought spread across the state, which is unfortunate. And you maybe kind of already are seeing where my overall wildfire potential outlook is going. This is the official May, June, and July predictions from the Climate Prediction Center. On the left is their temperature outlook. They're giving a lot of South Dakota this idea of equal chances. So that's saying, hey, we could be below average, we could be average, we could be above average, kind of 33% for each of those. But really, they're showing Western United States having that strong signal for above average temperatures. And this is pretty much reflective of the previous slides. But they are also showing a really strong signal for below average precipitation during that same time frame. And they're looking at the same data that I was just showing you as well. So this is just kind of, the overall summary forecast of what they're expecting in May, June, and July. And I do want to point out this was made a couple of weeks ago, and this will be updated here in the near future. Going out into July, August, and September, that hot signal continues, and it's high probabilities for a hot late summer, kind of even going into the early fall. And so, you start thinking about, okay, if we really start drying out in June and July, maybe it's going to be a July, August fire season for us. And I can definitely see that happening. These signals are very strong. They're very robust in all of the data, showing these hotter than average conditions across all of the CONUS. And to combine with the heat, we're talking about a lack of precipitation. You're seeing a lot of browns across the northern Great Plains, and so I do expect us to see less than average precipitation across the region. And we got pretty strong signals in nearly all of the models for that, and giving us that high probability of hotter and drier conditions than average across all of South Dakota. The official forecast from the Climate Prediction Center is highly reflective of what I just showed you. And again, that strong signal for below average precipitation kind of makes me think that northern Great Plains, northern Rockies are probably going to have a busy fire season this year. The big caveat I do want to throw out is you see across the Four Corners area in the precipitation, above average precipitation. So they're showing kind of a stronger than average Southwest Desert monsoon for us. And the reason I want to point that out is many times we see that monsoonal moisture drift up into South Dakota but it doesn't necessarily bring us a lot of rain. It brings us lightning. So I'm really going to be looking at the potential for drier than average conditions combined with some lightning going into the mid to late summer months this year. So it's things to think about as we progress through the season and prepare. Our drought outlook, the Climate Prediction Center is really showing drought progression across the northern Great Plains. And again, that's just reflective of the drier than average conditions and the warmer than average conditions that we are expecting. The one thing I want to point out is you see this is the continental United States average temperature since 1990, right? You're seeing an increasing temperature trend in that period. And so if you're trying to compare this summer or even next summer's temperature against a 30-year average, because of the increasing trend, just by the trend, we have a high probability of having a hotter than average summer this year. So trends for increasing temperatures across the United States. So I do want to point that out too, that a lot of the signal that we're seeing for a warmer than average temperature this summer is just a consistent trend that we've been seeing across the United States over the past 30 years. So to summarize, it's shaping up to be a hot and dry summer across the northern Great Plains and the northern Rockies. We're already in drought, and if we continue to be dry and hot, we are going to exacerbate the current drought. I want to point out that roughly across western South Dakota is very rough, but about 3/4 of an inch of rain should fall per week. And so as we go through the month of May, if we're not keeping up on that 3/4 of an inch of rain a week, we're falling behind, right? We're really falling behind. That number is pretty valid for the month of June as well, just so you know. We've had a lot of discussions with a lot of different meteorologists and predictive service folks across the United States this year, and everybody is pointing to 2017 and 2006 as being similar years to this year in terms of global patterns. If we look at El Nino and La Nina and the evolution of those things, those 2 years kind of stand out, and I want to point out that those were 2 big fire years in the state of South Dakota, 2 very dry years for the state of South Dakota. And so that doesn't bode well, but those were the 2 years that are kind of standing out to everybody as being similar in evolution to what we are seeing currently across the region. So I'll wrap up there. I'm expecting above average potential this summer for wildfires. So be prepared yeah, I think we're probably going to have to onboard some extra resources to ensure that we have what we need as we progress through the summer months. So my contact information, feel free to email, to text, call, whatever you need to do. If you've got questions, if you need me to present on RT, and feel free to use this presentation and disseminate as you see fit. Cheers.